Hey, what's going on, everybody? So I'm cleaning out my EK43 coffee grinder, and a lot of you have been asking recently what tools that I use in order to clean it out efficiently. And I just wanted to walk you through that whole system that I use of cleaning out my grinder with all of these tools behind me. So I'll show you one by one how I use all of these tools. You definitely don't need all of them. You will need some of them for sure. So yeah, let me walk you through it. So first and foremost, a vacuum helps a lot with cleaning. A lot of people have like the rolling cart shop vacuums, which is great. It's fantastic. I just have this little portable guy, Dyson. Works really well, super high powered. You don't really need that. But what you do need on your vacuum is a little bristle brush thing to get onto the burrs and create suction and just clean everything off. So a vacuum is a really helpful tool, also for cleaning on bar too, to just have this in your barista station and clean around the grinders, around the table, quickly clean, on the customer's pickup side of things, in case it, looks bad and you get grounds on the other side of your grinder. A tiny little portable shop vac really helps. So the first thing that I do when I open up my grinder is I'll brush it out. So I'll usually use this brush. This brush stays on my coffee bar, so I don't have access to it right away. But this is a really great brush to use for just brushing off the grounds all over the grinder. So I'll just use a brush to just wipe everything clean. And once I wipe everything clean, what I'll then want to do is use this pick tool. And there's all different types of tools that are like this. Even like if you have like a Cricut machine, they have like a little pick too. There's just a ton of tools that have a pick. But what I'll do for that is to wipe out all of the grounds in the screws and around the screws. But one thing that I haven't seen people do, what I really like to do is no matter how much I vacuum on the highest powered suction, how much I swipe the burrs clean, I will always see, and I just clean these burrs so you won't see it, but I will always see grounds in between these ridges. And what I'm using is the SSP brew burrs with the tightest coating, and grounds like to get stuck all over these ridges. So what I'll literally do is just sit there and I'll clean out every single ridge. I'll just go all the way around the burr and just clean out every single ridge on the outside. And then I'll come back, clean out every single ridge on the inside. And just make sure that they're all cleaned out. And then I'll go to the other burr and I'll do the same thing. So this works really well for getting rid of oils, of coffee particles, and things sticking to the burr. I think that, it's like you want hard, sharp surfaces. You don't want to have a lot of area for oils to build up and then oxidize and start to taste bad. So when you really clean out your grinder like this, what I found is it leads to little tiny gains in clarity. Like maybe your coffee tastes like 5 to 10% more clear, depending on like how often that you clean it. But I found after cleaning off my grinder, I get a little bit extra flavor clarity and just enjoyment of flavors, and also the satisfaction of having a clean grinder, I feel like makes the coffee taste better as well. So like I know a lot of shops that don't clean out their grinder for literally years. And at that point, it's beyond oils tasting rancid. It's just like, I can't imagine all the things that are probably going on inside of that grinder that you just don't know about in terms of, who knows, like if they cleaned it and they didn't put lube on it, or they just put Vaseline on the burrs, it could creating all sorts of issues for the grinder and shortening the lifespan of the grinder. Let alone producing a pretty oxidized, rancid cup of coffee. If they cleaned it out perfectly, assuming all of the parts were still working in prime condition, and the grinder was aligned and it didn't, unalign itself over that time, the coffee will probably taste a lot better. But if you're cleaning your grinder every single month, you'll still get marginal gains in terms of flavor. If you're cleaning it every day, you're already used to it. I know some shops that clean their grinders every day, which is crazy, but it's awesome. Other shops clean their grinders monthly, which is amazing. Really amazing shops. I know a lot of them that open up their grinder, clean it monthly, and some other shops do it bi-weekly and so on. So I would definitely recommend cleaning it monthly or bi-monthly if you don't have a lot of time, but monthly will be best. So when you're cleaning your grinder out, let me talk about this real quick, and then I'll go through all the tools that I use. When you're cleaning your grinder out, I see a lot of people unscrewing the burrs. And with my grinder, I have a ton of shims behind those burr sets because I have a near perfect alignment, or perfect swipe, I should say, all the way around the burrs. If you were to use a marker and draw all the way around and then put the burrs close together, as when you hear them screeching, it'll be a near perfect swipe on this grinder. So when I remove these, because I didn't use sticky tape tinfoil to align them, I will lose all of my hard work, my 24 hours of work basically that I spent just aligning this grinder. So I never undo this burr from the burr carrier or this burr from its housing. I'll never unscrew these 3 screws. I will never unscrew these 3 screws until it's time for me to replace my grinder after a given amount of coffee has gone through it. If you have a shop and you haven't replaced your burrs in 1, 2, 3 years, it's time that you start thinking at least about replacing them. Depending on what coating they have, you want your chefs, sushi chefs don't use dull knives, right? Amazing, talented chefs, why would they use dull knives? The same thing goes with coffee. You want to grind the beans efficiently as opposed to just essentially just crushing them, right? You want to cut the beans. You don't want to crush. If we wanted to use dull blades and we like the taste, we would just get a rock and just start crushing them, right? That's not what we want to do. We want to slice our beans as evenly as possible. That's why this geometry exists. That's why so many things exist around a grinder. It's always important that we analyze the sharpness of our burrs and the lifespan of our burrs. So, with all that being said, let's get into more of how I clean my grinder. Thank you for paying attention thus far, if you have already. So, let's see where I left off. Oh yes, so this tool, this pick tool, really comes in handy. So the next thing that I'm going to talk about is having the small brush is really nice to get into spaces that the big brush can't, like inside of here. It's also really nice to have a straw. I like this straw to blow into the grinder to push things out that I don't have access to. So that's a really nice way of getting things out of your grinder, is just blowing into a straw or using compressed air. Compressed air cans are great. Another thing that I like to do with the straw is I like to cut my hands around the vacuum as much as I can, put the straw where I need it to be, and create suction, and that will get into hard to reach places as well. It's a really, really nice trick I use all the time, especially on other grinders besides the EK, like espresso grinders, to get into things. It's really nice. I use the blow trick as well on the Mythos nearly every single time I clean it up. It's great. Another thing that I think I should talk about is the bearing in the very back and the spring that's also behind the bearing that you can't see. That's a little bit tricky to take out. I don't take it out every time. Every other time, definitely want to take it out. And how I use that is you can use 2 flathead screwdrivers. I like this guy a little bit for one side to get a better angle. And in order to get that bearing out, we'll have to kind of just squeeze and pull. So I'll get in on both sides of the bearing, and then squeeze and then pull, and I'll have to do that a few more times in order to get it to come out to where I can grab it, or get behind it with this little guy, and the spring will follow suit with it. And then I want to wipe that clean, and then essentially re-lubricate it, which I'll go over in a second. So when I'm wiping oils clean off of the grinder in the parts, I will always have a dedicated rag for that. So I like to use these rags for wiping off oils. It doesn't really have, like, if I were to spill water on the table and wipe it off, I wouldn't be able to wipe off much water with this because it doesn't absorb a lot of moisture. Whereas this black one, it's a lot thicker. And this absorbs a lot of moisture. It's like having like a paper towel, and you just put it on the spot, and then it'll absorb all the water, as opposed to kind of making a little bit more of a mess. So I'll use this rag. I'll have a dedicated rag for cleaning off oils, gunk, coffee debris, things like, I already cleaned this off, but like the back of this, I had a little accident here. I went too coarse. It's not going to affect anything. It's okay. But to wipe off like the back of the burr carrier, the moving burr carrier, this is always dirty. So I'll use this rag to do that. And then the clean rag. So once we have our burrs nice, shiny, and polished, we've vacuumed them, we've scraped inside of the edges, we've brushed them out, cleaned them off as much as possible. There's probably still some oils coating these burrs, right? And we might as well, if we're taking this time to clean our grinder, which it doesn't take much time, especially the more you do it, you can do this very quickly. But we're already taking the time to do that, so why not try and absorb those oils that are coating the burrs as much as we can and wipe them off. So this rag's great for that. I'll just wipe everything off, the inside of this housing, the inside rim. I'll wipe off, and then I will grab this, and then I'll wipe it off too, and just like really take my time to get everything off. And I actually haven't done this yet, so this is a great way to show you guys how I like to do it. And then you could also wrap around the pre-breaker bean feeder. This is a Titus bean feeder. It's a little bit deeper of grooves, so it actually slow feeds the beans. The beans get fed into the grinder a lot slower than the old auger. Let me show you the old auger real quick, actually. I have it right here. So, the stock auger. This is the stock auger. So as you can see, I'll try to line this up. Look at the differences. So beans get trapped inside of these little grooves, and they get fed into the grinder through this little spacing right here. And there's some extra space around it too, but essentially, so this burr carrier slash auger slash pre-breaker, whatever you want to call it, feeds beans a lot slower into the grinder as opposed to the stock one because of this. And I feel like this one's a little bit wider too. Maybe, no, just a little bit, just a little bit. All right, I'm geeking out. So, all right, so I've wiped this. I'm just going to get inside of these grooves here. All right, so once I've wiped that, I'm going to then go over to this burr, and I'll do the same exact thing. Just wiping off as much as we can, getting into those grooves, onto those blades. You know, we don't want to have rancid, oxidized oils. I'd rather just have a hard steel knife. And then that will build up oils, a little oils, right after you use it. Okay, so that's great. I'm actually going to go inside of where the beans get fed. Actually, I don't even need to do that. I don't know why I'm doing that. Beans don't make contact there. Really, they only make contact just a little bit, but mainly just around this guy. So, but since they do a little bit, sometimes I'll just go in here and I'll just wipe this out. Definitely not a necessary thing. Every once in a while, like you'll get like gunk and stuff inside of the, what do you call that? The housing inside of here, and it just makes sense to clean it off. So that is mainly the majority of how I clean it. I'll show you how I lubricate everything in just a second. What I really like, just to recommend to you guys, it's definitely not a needed thing. If you're aligning your grinder, over and over again, you're constantly closing your grinder to check alignment to, you want your burrs to touch, and then to do the marker test, you draw a marker around here, screw your grinder back together, and then just get it to touch the slightest bit. You want to just hear the burrs touch the slightest bit, and then you go coarser again and coarser, and then you unscrew your grinder and see the marker test, how much the marker got wiped off. And you keep on doing that until you get a full swipe on the inner burr, the stationary burr. And then once you get a full swipe, you're like, oh my gosh, I have an aligned grinder. And then you align the other burr, the moving burr, the outer burr, and you do the marker test on this burr. And then you'll see that just a little bit of the marker got wiped off. And you're like, wait, what's going on? I have to align this burr now. And then, so you start to align this burr, and then you get a full swipe, and you're like, yes, I'm good to go. And then you're like, well, let me just check back to the stationary burr, the inner burr, and do the marker test again. Unscrew your grinder, do all this stuff, screw it back, and see the if you got a full swipe, and then you don't. And you're like, oh my gosh, so now you have to align this burr again, but keeping in mind of how this burr is aligned, and then you just have to go over and over and over and over until you get a full swipe on both of the burrs. And that is how you have a very aligned grinder. And that took me about 24 hours total. I did it about 2 times, and I was like, you know what? I'm putting so much shims on this grinder. Let me try to map it out. So the second time I kind of mapped it out, and I was like, okay, I'm using this many shims over here, this many shims over here. You get a really good feel for how your grinder, how your burrs should be aligned. And then I just undid all of it. The third time I did it, I mapped it out, and I used the least amount of shims possible, the least amount of tinfoil. All I did was use tinfoil and non-sticky tinfoil. So if I unscrew those burrs, all my hard work would be it would be ruined. So, but non-sticky tinfoil has a little bit finer of a micron size, smaller micron size, so you can get into the weeds a little bit more, which I really like. So yeah, I mapped it out to use the least amount of tinfoil as possible. I can't remember what I did. I think I have it written down somewhere. But yeah, so that is why these guys help a lot. They are these screws that go into this guy, and this guy is a torque wrench. So what that means is for the faceplate, I'll put it on, I'll screw it in, and then this gives at about 26.5 pounds. So as you can see right there, it says 26.5. And this brand, it was sent to me by Frank Titus in Germany, Weha. It's just a cheap little torque wrench, but it fits into here, and then it stops at 26.5 pounds. So I know that my screws are always screwed in consistently. I feel like on this grinder, like just the metal making contact with thick metal, it probably won't make a difference, but it's that, and since there's only 2 screws, it can throw off alignment a little bit more possibly, but it's probably not going to be a huge thing. But it's a really good peace of mind thing for me, And I'd always want to have that kind of system on my future grinders. And even just mod my other grinders to have that same system because it works really well, and I don't have to count the rotations of the Phillips screwdriver, just to be as consistent as possible. I'm like, I feel like I'm doing something wrong, but at least I have like somewhat of a better approach of being consistent. So it's like on the Mythos, I have 4 screws, then I'll do 5 turns on the top right screw, and then I'll do 5 turns on the bottom left screw. And then I'll go to either the bottom right or the top left screw, and then I'll do 5 turns, and then 5 turns, and then I'll do a few more turns until I just feel a little bit of tension on the top right. I'll go back to the bottom left, and then I'll go, either to the right or to the top left. So it's like I'm doing this crisscross pattern, and I'm doing this turn pattern to be as consistent as possible. But, if you have something like this, you don't have to think about it, and it's really nice. Okay, I went on a little bit of a tangent there. A really good thing to have when you're doing this is gloves. I really like it because I hate things on my hands. Like, if I get syrup or like sauce on my hands, it's like a super bad pet peeve of mine. I did that for way too many years, and I absolutely hated it. So I've devised whole systems around it to not let it happen again. And sometimes it still does, but rarely. But working on bar, I mean. But when I'm cleaning my grinders, I'll just put gloves on, and it's really nice just to have like grippy gloves for like getting into things that are oily, and especially like some lube. When you use it and you use too much of it, it'll get all over your parts sometimes. And I've learned to use it very sparingly because I definitely don't like oil buildup and coffee ground buildup because of a poor lubrication job. If I use too much of it, you'll start seeing lube in weird places, and you're like, dang, like I don't like this. I wonder, you start wondering about all these things, and it just trapping coffee grounds is just weird. So I definitely like gloves, and also when I am putting the lubrication on. So I think I covered everything here that really needs to be covered. The last step in this whole process is lubrication. So I use this petrol gel. It's a food safe lubricant. Some people use Vaseline, and where Vaseline isn't nearly as load bearing, I don't know exactly if it makes a big difference in this grinder. But I mean, you have to think like the burrs are rotating like 1,300 times a minute. So how many times is that? A second is still a lot, right? And if anything were to happen, you have the shear plate, which is this guy, locking up against, it goes on the motor shaft. So this goes on the motor shaft, and then the shear plate locks it together. If anything were to happen, like imagine you put rocks in your grinder, it would build up so much tension, and then in order for your grinder not to be completely destroyed and ruined, is this guy. This guy will break, and this guy will break. Will save your whole grinder. Will save you a ton of money. Luckily, it hasn't happened. Luckily, we don't have rocks very often. Still, sometimes do. I still see rocks sometimes. Very rare, even in the coffees that we source, which is crazy. But yeah, so using load-bearing lubricant, I'll wrap it around the, I'll put my glove on. I use a plastic glove. That's a throwaway glove. And I'll put a little bit on the bearing and the spring when I clean those. I'll wrap them all in just a little tiny coat of lubricant, just to allow things to move easily, flow easily. And then what I'll also do is I'll put a small amount of lubricant inside of the moving burr carrier. And if you just put it on the outer, like on the inside, on this part instead of on this part, when you put it in the grinder, all that lube that you put right here will then move on to the motor shaft more. So I'll show you. As you can see, nothing really in here. It's a little bit of lube, but that was from the last time I did this. And when I actually got this burr carrier from Frank at Titus, it was perfectly lubed on the inside. And I thought that was a really, really nice touch for somebody to do, that you know that takes care of their equipment, is for things just to be really well set up for success. So I have some lube right here. And then also I'm going to get a little bit of lube on my finger with the gloves. And I'm going to wrap it around the motor shaft. Just a little bit of extra lubrication. I want to be really careful not to get it on any of the other parts inside, because then again, it'll get inside your grinder and it sucks. It sucks a lot. At this point, like on some grinders, I'd rather not use lube than to use lube, but I've learned to use it very, 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 very sparingly. One time I over-lubed my Mythos grinder, and the lube got behind the back burr and the moving burr, and it literally got all the grounds behind the burr wet. And that wetness of grounds then translated into all the other coffee that was being ground, because there's buildup in the burrs and the Mythos. It's actually a great thing. It makes for a really interesting flavor profile and grind distribution, because you're constantly regrinding the coffee, and it's very even, it's very uniform, because the clump crusher is actually holding a lot of that coffee up above it, so the grounds in the chamber is being reground. That's why when you single dose on a Mythos, or when you hardly have any beans in the hopper, your beans then flow like super fast. You need to grind so much finer. And that's because of the beans. It's because of a few things, but the beans not being reground, because there's no beans up above them to be reground. So it makes for an interesting flavor profile. You could grind a lot coarser that way. And sometimes it depends on so many variables, but especially for traditional darker roasted espresso, that's a fantastic way to pull shots. A lot of people rip on the Mythos for it causing heat distribution. It can be, your coffee will start tasting worse throughout the day, in my experience, but not very marginally worse. It's definitely noticeable, but like the lighter you roast, and like all these ultralight roasters, the tastes in some of these coffees, especially in milk, is like very, very, very tiny on, like, you know, let's say like more concentrated ratios. So the noticeable flavor defects from that heat are going to be a little bit more noticeable on those types of coffees. There's all sorts of theories that I have around it, but it does make a little bit of a difference. I keep my Mythos unplugged a lot of the time, so it doesn't really happen to me. But when you do plug it in, you can actually grind finer. Your coffee will extract higher. Like 140 degrees is like around the norm of what it heats it up to be, right? And when you think about it, like coffee is roasted at such a high temperature, it's brewed at a much higher temperature. Like, you know, you brew coffee at 140 degrees. How long will it take it to extract? It'll take a long time submerged in 140 degree water, right? And now we're just talking about air and being in like this air environment that's not even like air passing through everything. So it's not going to efficiently heat all of these grounds and all of these beans inside of the chamber. And then keep in mind, you're also grinding through a ton of beans at once, and the chamber is only so small. So like, it's really hyped up to be like Mythos is bad because it heats coffee. A lot of these people haven't worked with the Mythos for many years. Like so many of these OG baristas that grew up on it, or, you know, they grew up on other grinders, but have used Mythos as the norm. And now everybody uses, you know, Malkonig EK43 burrs, or like, you know, the popular grinders that everybody's using. And, you know, you want to talk about horizontal burrs and regrinding and terrible cleaning processes and all these other things. Like, we could talk about that grinder, right? And not having a clump crusher, or on some of their grinders, the clump crusher isn't even in the manual, but it's actually in the grinder and nobody knows to replace it. It's just, you know, coffee is a very strange thing. And I know I'm going on a tangent, but yeah, so that's my feelings about the industry and the mythos and why it works really well and why some people don't like it. But going back to the mythos and the lubricant, it made all of my grounds wet, and my grinds started clumping like crazy. And this literally happened for weeks, and it was like, what's going on? I put so many grinds in there, and I just cleaned it out just like pretty quickly. But I didn't remove the back burr of the mythos, and it was still happening. I even replaced my clump crusher and on the mythos, and I was like, what is going on? Why is this happening? My grinds, as soon as your grinds clump, you know that you won't have the most efficient extraction. And the less clumpy your grinds are, often the better your coffee tastes. So I really don't like to see any type of clumping. And then WDT tool is kind of like a lazy excuse for me as, a professional barista going through high volume coffee, serving 100 drinks an hour, or, in total with like cold brew and drip and stuff like that. But like, I don't know, let's say like 70 drinks an hour on espresso, 70 double shots. I need to rip through it. I don't have time to do WDT, and nor would I want to do that when I have a grinder that is so expensive it should be giving me everything that I want and more, right? So in order to not have that clumping, what I had to do was take off the back burr of the mythos. The back burr, the inner burr is the moving burr, as opposed to this one. This is the stationary burr. The inner burr is a stationary burr, whereas the mythos, the inner burr is a moving burr. It just has different mechanics, it moves inside. So I had to take that off, and then behind it I found a lot of grinds caked on to the back of the moving burrs, carrier, station, whatever you want to call it, and they were wet with lube. It wasn't a lot of lube, but it was just enough to literally transfer into all of the other coffees that were going into my portafilter. I was shocked, and I was like, this can't happen again. I'm not going to lube my grinder nearly as much. And for a while, I just didn't even lube it. I was like, I don't want to deal with that ever again. But now I've learned to use lube sparingly, very, very sparingly. So, with all that being said, I put a little bit of lube on the motor shaft. If you're taking off the back bearing and the spring, which you should do every other time, just put a little coating of lube on it. And now what I'll do is I'll just take my finger and I'll just kind of rub this lube that I already placed in here and just wrap it around the metal, and then just a little bit on this side too, just to get it nice and wrapped. And then I'll take my gross dirty rag that I use for wiping up oil and lube and all sorts of other stuff, and see that on here. I don't really want that. I'm just gonna wipe it off just a little bit. I still want just a little bit of lube on the back, because it's going to make contact against the what do you call it, the bearing. So I want a little bit on there, and I kind of do want to lube the bearing now that, but I don't do that every single time, but I kind of want to now, but I'm not going to, because that would make this process even slower. So after that, I'll now just take a little bit of lube, and I will put it on this guy. Just wrap it around, and I guess you could do that after I do this, but I'll just hold this in one hand, and now I will put this burr carrier on the grinder. Oh wow, okay, I'm gonna need two hands for this. This is, there's a lot of tension. So let's go over here. And there we go. Yeah, this Titus burr carrier, it's never really that hard to put it on, but it's meant to have as much tension as possible, as much tolerance or the least tolerance as possible, because the more tolerance that you have, if I just rip the hair off my head and I showed you that gap between two surfaces of space, that would be about 10, actually that would probably be about like 50 to 80 microns of tolerance, somewhere like that. It depends on the human, right? But this grinder is really meant to have around, not this grinder, but like other grinders are meant to have a tolerance of 10 microns. That's like the size of a red blood cell. A red blood cell is 8 microns, and imagine 10, and like a human hair, I think it could go all the way up to like 150, probably even higher. But like, I think the average human hair size is around like 40 to 80 microns or something. So that's the kind of tolerances that we're talking about in coffee. They're so crazy. So with this burr carrier, it's meant to have even less space than the stock one, which is right here that I showed you. So it's meant to have less space all the way around. The burr carrier is machine aligned to be as parallel as possible. So what that means is if you had a red blood cell right here, it would be too far out of tolerance. So you essentially need this whole surface, all the way around, this whole surface to be insanely aligned. This one is done very well. These machines are professional machines, but and to be honest, I got the same swipes with the Titus burr carrier that I did with this one. But you know, I have a dial indicator tool that I can use to go around and see how aligned they are. I haven't done that, but yeah, this is still really good. But as you can see, the burr sits, at least SSP burrs, they have a little ridge for it to sit around this much width all along 360 degrees of the burr carrier. So it's like, you know, like half an inch or so. So all of that radius needs to be really aligned. But going back to this, so I'll put this in here, and now I have my shim. I'm going to come over on this side, and I'm going to put my lubricated shim inside. And as you can see, that fits really well. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab just a little bit of that lube and just put some right around this one surface. There we go, just a little bit. And then what that'll do is make contact with this, which see how it spins? So the motor shaft is pushing up against this guy, which the grind setting indicator says how far you want this to come out or draw back in. And this is finer, coarser. So it makes contact against this part, and the whole grinder moves. But yeah, it's kind of an interesting system. I think I said that right. Essentially, the motor shaft revolves, and then this just says how far you want your grind setting to be. So it'll still be making contact with it. And ideally, you definitely don't want it to wobble like that, because then your grind setting gets out of whack. So that's definitely what it doesn't do. So yeah, so that's how this grinder works. I'm gonna put it back together and show you guys how I put it back together and how I just make sure that it's aligned for the next use. And I'm going to try one thing that I want to do for batch brew. I've been grinding really coarse for batch brew, like setting 23, or I'm sorry, setting 19, which this grinder only goes up to 16 settings right here. So I have to make it grind coarser than what it's really meant to be. So I'm going to do a little trick, because I want to grind even coarser than that, essentially 6 settings coarser than 16. So I'm going to do a little experiment while I'm filming this, which I think will be cool to show you guys. So I'm going to move my phone right here, and now what we'll do is we'll put this guy on. We'll make sure that we're not on the finest grind setting either. And then I'm gonna put my screws in place. Just twist it in just a little bit. Cool. And now that's stationary. And then let's just screw it in. I just like to screw it in little by little. Like this is what I do on basically any grinder. This grinder doesn't really matter because I have a torque wrench, but I don't know. I'm so used to doing that. Okay, and then I'll screw it. It's tight, but now I'll make it as tight as possible, and you'll hear a click, and that'll be over 26.5 pounds of pressure. Click. That's as much as it'll go. Let's do it here. Yep, 26.5 pounds of pressure. Let's do it one more time. Perfect. And one more time. Awesome. And now what we'll do is we will take our little tool that's a little bit smaller, this tiny little guy, and we're going to put it right into this hole. I don't think it matters which one you use because there's another hole on the other side. And then we'll take a flathead. It doesn't really matter what screwdriver you have. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to screw this clockwise. And I want to screw it until I hear a little bit of screeching. Just a little bit. I just want to get right up to that point where I hear screeching. And then just back off the tiniest bit. And then I'm going to mark that. I'm going to lock that in at 0. So I'll show you how I do that. So let's turn the grinder on. And if you're putting in new burrs, by the way, guys, if you're putting in brand new burrs, make sure that you take the grind setting and grind even coarser. So go anti-clockwise. If it's the same, if you're putting in SSP burrs, let's say, or like other branded burrs, just grind even coarser because you don't know if those burrs are going to be a lot thicker than the stock burrs that came with this machine. So that's something I had to learn the hard way. And then you're just going to have your burrs locked up and not being able to grind. You're like, what's going on? That's actually what happened with an ode that I got. Same things. I had to do the same thing. Even though I just bought a stock off of Amazon, it still happened to me. And I was like, what's going on with this grinder? It's broken. It's actually not. You just have to make the setting grind a lot coarser. So then those burrs have free space to move as opposed to just being locked up against each other and being forced to move, which isn't great. Luckily, these grinders are built with a fail-safe, so if it's not meant to grind any finer, or if they're all locked up, the motor will switch itself off. And there's a button that you can press on the back or the underside of this grinder, to flip the what's it called? Like flip the breaker or something like that to like reset it, because it was using too much torque or power. But yeah, okay, so we'll turn this on. And I'm just going to screw this. I'm moving it. I forgot I had it on setting 19, not 16. Hear that? So let's go back to it. I'll show you what it sounds like. All right, and you hear it went, and I went left, and then it doesn't do it anymore. And then I test that again, and I just go a tiny turn is like, and then I back off the littlest bit I can while not hearing that sound, and that'll be 0. So now that we're at 0, this is where I would then lock in the grinder and leave it at that. But like I said before, I want to go 6 settings coarser than 16. So this will be kind of an interesting thing that I'll probably do very wrong. And I'm trying to think about what the best solution to do this is. Because whenever I pull espresso, it'll typically be between 2 2 for like turbo shots to 1 to 1 to 0. So by doing this, I can't do any more espresso, but I can make for a really nice drip coffee by grinding a lot coarser. And I've had to do this on the Malcon in Guatemala as well. It made some of the best coffee I've ever had. That grinder, I sandpaper align the grinder because the blades, you can't do the marker test on them. So I sandpaper align the grinder based on a Scott Rao article. And oh my gosh, it made the best coffee ever. But I had to make that grinder like go, I think it was like 6 or 7 settings coarser in order for me to hit the sweet spot of batch brew. And I literally use like, you know, around 86 grams for batch brew. I don't use that much at all. So I'm shocked when I see shops that don't even grind on the coarsest possible setting when they have like 180 grams of coffee that they use for batch brew. It's kind of a weird thing, and I wonder if they were to grind coarser, it might not taste very good because it's still probably having a lot of issues with like channeling and like. But if you ground a lot coarser, to where the coffee just rips through that basket, I feel like you'd get really amazing cups with a lot of coffees that all these shops are using. So sometimes you do want to do this, and I'll show you how to do it and how to experiment with it. So I want to be super precise. I could just twist this a lot of times and just lock it in, and we'll call that good. But I want to know that I'm actually going 6 settings coarser, because I know that I always cup on 10, setting 10 when my grinder burrs are at just, when my burrs touch just before 0. So in order to do that, I would have to make my cupping grind settings at 16, I'm sorry, my cupping grind setting at 4, which would be, I think, if I'm saying that right. Sorry, I'm thinking about all this stuff in my head. So essentially 16, 24, grind setting 24, or if I wanted to go 6 settings coarser, it would be 22. So grind setting 22 would be at 16. So that means grind setting 10 would be at 22 at 16, and then 10 would be at 4. Yeah, so then I'd use a cupping grind size at 4 in order for me to be able to grind coarser. So yeah. So I want to take this guy, and essentially what I want to do is lock it in, and now I want to move it back 6, and I'm going to put some pressure on this guy. All right, so 6 settings coarser. You guys came for the advanced session today. So, okay, so I'm gonna keep it at 6, and now I'm going to make the burrs lock. Wait. Oh, dang it. I didn't want to do that. Oh, man. I actually have to go the other way. So, yeah, so I'll actually have to do a different test. Okay, here's what we're going to do. I did that completely wrong. I don't want my burlock to be at 6. I want my burlock to be at -6, which we don't have that kind of luxury because this black thing doesn't go farther. So what we're going to have to do is do a little bit of some rough estimates. And I am probably doing this in a really dumb way that I'll figure out after this video. But Let's try it. So, if this is at, see this screw? This is angled roughly right at 7.73, roughly 7.3. So 6 above 7.3 is, if I make this 8, yeah. So 7.3 is 7 to 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 to 1, 13.3. Oh my gosh, this is a bit ridiculous, guys. Okay, so here's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna move this guy, keep this on 0. So I moved it roughly 6 settings coarser while it's still on 0. So I should have thought about this before making this 50-minute long video. Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry, guys. If you're watching this at this point, I don't know what's wrong with you as well as what's wrong with me. Jeez. Oh, that's nuts. Okay, so let's wrap this up. All right, so what I just did there is now 0. Now 0 is actually setting 6, what it was previously. But now see how it says right here, minimum at 6, which is 0. Setting 16. Setting 16 isn't 16 anymore, guys. Setting 16 is roughly, based on my tape calculations, that setting is now 22. So now I can grind a lot coarser on this grinder and experiment with that. And what I'll probably have to do is just do some tests to make sure I'm still getting the right extractions in my pour over coffee and my cupping, because I could have just really made things weird. But going back to that setting of your burrs touching just before 0 is the easiest thing in the world. Going to this setting, I'll devise a much better way for it. But right now, I'm happy that I'm able to grind coarser, and I have a very, very, very clean grinder. I can't wait to start brewing some coffee. It's like 6 o'clock right now, but I am a-okay to start brewing a cup and seeing how it tastes. One thing that I would recommend too is if you're aligning your grinder, sometimes even after cleaning it, just run a little bit of coffee through it beforehand, especially when you're aligning it, because the burrs scrape together. When the burrs scrape together, I would imagine there's some metal fragments that come off of your grinder. A lot of people would say that that's okay. Chefs do this all the time. It's how they sharpen knives. You probably want to wipe it off afterwards and you'll see a big black streak, but I always just like to, just run a little dose of coffee, just simple little dose of coffee. It gives me a little bit more peace of mind. But yeah, guys, that is how I clean my grinder. It definitely does not take 53 minutes to do. But those were all of my tools. I hope you can take this information and start ripping your machines open at the shops you work at or at home and feel comfortable with doing this stuff and making tasty, tasty, tasty coffee. See you next time, guys. Peace. Okay, so here is the updated version of how to make 16 get to 22. So I did it wrong with the tape. That could get me close, but I want to be really precise. So I had to think about this for a sec. So my burr lock is right before 0. I've made all of the adjustments necessary. So when I go to 16, it's really 16. So what I need to do, I want to go make 16 go all the way to 22 essentially. So I'm going to go up to 6, grind setting 6. And then now what I'm going to do is just twist this guy. Twist this guy. So this becomes loose. And now I'm going to bring this. Notice how this doesn't go anywhere? I'm going to bring this to 0. And then I'm going to lock it in And now, once I lock it in, I could just show you guys for reference. All right, so now when I go all the way to 16, it'll be perfectly synced up to setting 22, which means that my previous setting of cupping on 10 will now be at 4, and my filter coffee setting, what I really like is 13.4 for most coffees, will now be 13.4 minus 6. So that is how you do it. Pretty cool.